Hi Michelle, it's Emma here. This is my course synopsis video. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am on the traditional territories of the Tanaxa, Secwepemc, Syilx, and Sinixt people, and I am very grateful to be able to live, learn, work, and play on their beautiful lands. I thought I'd begin the video by telling you a bit about what I knew before I took this course and what I know now, and then sort of go from there. So before I took this course, to be honest, I thought I knew more than I did. Where I come from, Salmon Arm, not very far away, but where I come from, they try to integrate a lot of Indigenous learning into the school system. But since taking this course, I've sort of learned that a lot of the things that we were learning back home were very colonial in their viewpoints. We talked about in class how when Indigenous courses first started being taught, they were taught by white guys who were looking at it purely from an outside perspective. And in Salmon Arm, I have realized that a lot of the courses there are very much taught like that. It's very much by the book, sort of, well, colonial. Which kind of made me sad at first because a lot of us miss out on the truth, and so then we're not as good at reconciliation. But I'm very grateful that I now have had this chance to learn more about it. Another thing that I knew quite a bit about before coming into this course was actually Indigenous medicine. So my mother is, she has a big background in Indigenous medicine. She actually took some of the first university courses that were available in BC about Indigenous people, but she quickly realized that they were very colonial, and so she learned in her own ways about it. But for example, we will often pick rose hips and fir tips and make tea out of them for vitamin C, or sometimes we'll use yarrow for pain and fever reduction. So it was really interesting, though, to learn more about that. I found that part of the course very fascinating. And another thing that I didn't know about Indigenous medicine was how much of it was taken from Indigenous people and used by white doctors and European, Eurocentric doctors to make a lot of the medicines that we now have today. And although I wasn't surprised to learn that they didn't give any credit to the cultures they took that from, it was also another very sad thing to learn, because you'd think that by now we'd have a little more appreciation for what we took. Another thing that I had sort of heard about before coming to the course but didn't know much about was how much humor is used in Indigenous story and literature, and that really struck me. I did my circles share on that, but the idea of using humor as a way, like consciously as a way to make stories stick and to make things be more enjoyable and make more sense to people is just very appealing to me. I've always thought that laughter is the best medicine. Of course it is. And it was really nice to hear that and so that was one of the things that I really enjoyed learning about, and also one of the things that they missed teaching us in the Indigenous courses that we took in high school, or the Indigenous sections of courses that we would do. I think maybe because you wouldn't necessarily understand that from an outside perspective, of course, due to like the stereotypes that are often perpetuated by colonialism of like the stoic, noble, savage, and so it gladdened my heart to hear that and to learn that. And yeah, I just found it really, really interesting. One of the other things that I learned was a lot about colonization, because, well, again, the courses back home sort of skipped over how bad it was, I suppose. I guess they focused more on the literal facts of what the white people came and saw when they first met Indigenous people, but they sort of skipped over what the Indigenous people might have seen when they were first meeting the white people, and how when they were being treated the way they were being treated by the white people. One of the most interesting parts of that to me was how the school system itself is even so colonial. So I'd heard before of the school system not being like a one-size-fits-all thing. Of course, it's not. Some people are better at writing and some people aren't, or learning in rows and some people aren't. But it had never really struck me that it was a colonial system, or that it was like created by with a colonial mindset. But thinking back about it, it makes a lot of sense. And, well, I guess the school system doesn't make sense the way it was made. It's funny to me that we created a system that is so structured and so regulated to try and help us learn, when we're growing up and when we're children, it's like quite the opposite, you know, like we grow and learn in spurts and bursts, and there are times when we have ideal days for learning and times when we don't, and our school system just does not take that into account. It's all about efficiency and effectiveness and learning as much as you can, as quickly as you can, without any really real regard for human nature itself. And so just thinking about that and reflecting on how Indigenous learning is done was really interesting for me, because I'd never really thought to take that into account when thinking about the school system. So I'm very grateful to you for teaching us that. And so the last thing that I wanted to bring up about what I learned in the course was about the foster care system and how it treats Indigenous children, because that was something that was just completely new to me. Growing up, I had a lot of friends who were in this foster care system, but although you would talk about it sometimes, they would generally try to avoid that subject, of course, because I guess it's difficult to talk about. And so, but even so, a lot of their experiences would have been very different from Indigenous children's experiences. And it reminds me of one experience that I had myself with the foster care system, or I suppose my brother did, where one time when he was in maybe grade 2, he decided to walk all the way home from our elementary school to our house. And we live about 15 kilometers away, maybe. So he started walking. He had to cross 3 major highways, and he got about 4 or 5 kilometers away from home when a social worker actually pulled over and stopped him. And because he was 6 years old and tiny and had a huge backpack and was walking down the side of the highway, and she saw him and she pulled over and she made him sit down at her feet, and she was calling the police and everything. And she took pretty good care of him, even though he didn't need it, because my mom, once she found out, came pretty quick once he told the social worker who his parents were. But it got me thinking, I wonder if an Indigenous child who did the same thing would have the same experience. And I don't know if they would. But I don't know if it would have been much worse, or not better, but just different. I don't know if the social worker would have even pulled over at all, first of all, or if they did pull over, I wonder if they would have let the Indigenous child talk and tell them who their parents were or anything. And every time we talked about it, I just thought about that and I wondered. And I guess that's something that I'll continue to reflect on as I learn more. But yeah, it was just a very interesting topic to me. So in conclusion, I learned a lot from this course, about a little more about Indigenous medicine, a lot about colonization, especially in the school system, and just in general. I learned a lot about how my own knowledge was somewhat wrong or different from what is actually true. And I learned a lot about humor in Indigenous stories, which I thought was very interesting. And so I just would like to say thank you so much for teaching this course. I really appreciate it, and I will definitely carry forward all the knowledge that you have passed on with me and help it grow as it may. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good rest of your grading season.